Your alternative talk radio contact. The Planet. KGRAradio.com.
With infinite complacence, people went to and fro of the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Into the Fray. A couple of things before we get to my talk with Mark. I did just air a brand new episode for the Insiders, and I'm looking to thank the anonymous caller from the Philippines. You know who you are. Thank you so much for calling in with that. If you would like to become an insider, simply go to intothefrayradio.com and click Become an Insider. There is both a monthly and a yearly option for you to choose from. So if you love the show, consider supporting it by becoming an insider, which also instantly gives you extra content. With this being episode 198, that means 200 is coming up very quickly, and I am looking for your stories, specifically from the hotline. So call your creepy story into 877-317-9111 and be part of my 200th episode. If you needed to get a hold of me, email address is shannon@intothefrayradio.com or go to the website intothefrayradio.com and click Contact. And now, my talk with Mark.
I have been listening to podcasts and podcasts and podcasts for the last year and a half, one after the other, trying to find somebody that I felt, knowing my condition the way it is, that I felt could keep me calm and do this the way it needs, because this story needs to be told. And when I heard you, it was like, okay, I think I found who I need to talk to here. So nobody else, no other show has ever heard this story before. I promise you that.
I appreciate you being willing to tell this story.
Well, like I say, this is something, the whole time this was going on, it lasted about 3-4 years. The whole time it was happening, he used to tell me all the time, God, this would make one hell of a book or a movie. And I'm like, it would. But I said, you don't want to talk to he won't talk to anybody about it. And I said, how's anybody ever going to hear about it? This rocked his world. It just absolutely, he was not, this community where I grew up, this city, Highland in Illinois,
now hold on before you go on, Mark, because I want to make sure that I know where I can and can't. So let's officially start so that because I don't know if you want all the locations in there and all that. I'll
tell what city, because that's kind of important.
Oh, okay, all right. So
I'll
as
tell
long
what
as
city. I just don't want to give his address or anything.
Oh
no,
yeah. We don't need to do all that. Yeah, and then of course we'll leave his first name out of that. So let's kind of we'll go ahead and start so that. I mean, it's not the end of the world if you say his name. I'll mark it. I'll go, okay, he said his name, and then we'll go on.
Okay.
Now, I know you sent me something in Messenger, and I appreciate that, but I did not read it because I wanted to be surprised. When I can be surprised, I kind of like to be, so I don't really know.
Okay. Sure.
Except for what you had already typed and I read. I didn't read what you sent me because I want to be surprised. So
that's something that maybe, I know you, on certain guests of yours, that you post links. That might be a link you might want to post, or my Facebook page if anybody wants to get in touch with me. That's probably the best way to do it.
Great, awesome, thanks, Mark.
Things like that. God, there was when we're all done and you're shutting down or whatever. I don't know what your normal procedure is. Do you come back on the phone then and after you shut the recorder off?
No, it just records if I'm on, and then I just
okay.
Yeah, we say goodbye and that's it.
At the end of the show, I want to, when we're not on the air, so to speak, I want to give you my friend's name, address, and any contact information that I have.
Okay.
Because how can I say this? He's very scared of this whole thing. He's afraid it's over with now. It's been gone for 6 years or so, but he's afraid that it'll come back if he talks about it, if that makes any sense.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Deep Christian, he always kind of had the feeling like this was against God, what was going on in his house. And, but if anybody can get this guy to open up, and he has on CDs, all the EVPs that happened from this, and he would not give them to me back when this was all going on. These EVPs are absolutely the best I've ever heard in my life. This shit is unfreaking believable.
Now, I'll try my darndest, once I get the information to get a hold of him, but it'll ultimately be up to him. But I still thank you for telling the story. So, okay, Mark, well, if you want to, let's, start from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay, well, the beginning, I guess the best place to start is that this took place in a small city by the name of Highland, Illinois. And if that name sounds familiar to people, especially in the UFO community, it would be because if you've ever heard, back in the 90s at some point, the History Channel made a documentary called UFOs over Illinois. Mm-hmm. And it was widely popular. I don't know if you ever saw it or not, but it was extremely cool. And that whole thing begins with a gentleman by the name of Alvern Knoll, who was the first one to cite the UFO in this documentary where this whole thing started, and that was in Highland. That city is a UFO hotspot. I myself, when I lived there from July or August of 66 through November of 71, when my family moved up here to Minneapolis, where I'm at now. Mm-hmm. And I've been back there tons of times since, but I haven't lived there since 71. I lost my train of thought.
Oh, that's
another thing that happens when you get old. What was I talking about? Oh, when I was back in about 69, when I was 9 or 10, I saw a UFO in this city. We were just sitting down to dinner, and all of a sudden there was this strange whirring type noise. I can't really describe it. It was very strange noise. And being a boy of that age, I wanted to see the police car or whatever. I thought it was a siren or something. So, and this city was so small that there was never any police. You never heard sirens. You never heard anything. So I ran out in the back porch right away. We were just sitting down to dinner, and I got up and ran out onto the back porch, and we had this great big giant tree that separated our backyard from the people next door that we rented from. And right up at the top of this giant tree was this disc. I was so close to it that nowadays, as an adult, I could throw a rock and hit it. That's how close it was. So I know what I saw. And it was just your typical disc, a couple lights on it, and it sat there for about 5 seconds, and then it just like a rocket shot off towards Trenton. It was so fast that you couldn't actually see it go. You could just tell what direction it went in, and it shot off towards Trenton. And of course, if you keep following that line, you'll eventually hit Scott Air Force Base, which is over that way too. So, I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not, but
right.
I found out this gentleman we're going to be talking about here in a couple minutes, this friend of mine. He told me in the 80s, when I used to go down there all the time too, he said, I never told you about this at the time it happened. I know we all teased you about they did. I mean, all the neighborhood kids, after I saw that thing, they just teased me relentlessly.
Yeah.
Did the little green man wave at you and all
right.
The usual. And he said, I know we teased you relentlessly, and my dad wouldn't let me tell you at the time, but he said right about that same time you saw your UFO, Dad saw one out on the farm. They had a farm outside of town, and then a home in town. And he was out working on the farm late one night. My friend told me that that his dad came home one night and was all just shaken. And Bud, his dad, was the kind of guy who, he's a man's man. This guy does not cry. He doesn't get upset. Nobody messes with him. He's a man's man. And he said Dad came home and he was just shaking and crying and all upset. And as soon as we got him calmed down, he told the story. that this craft, whatever, had chased him into a ditch or something. I don't know. I wasn't there, but but he said that Dad wouldn't let me tell anybody at the time because he was a prominent businessman in town, But he says, I'll tell you about it now if it makes you feel any better. So this community is a paranormal hotspot. And not too many people know about it, really. But these are all things that really happen. So that's just to set the stage a little bit. Okay, so what happened was, as I said, I used to go down to Illinois all the time from about 85 through about 95, several times a year. And then I kind of got older and money got tight and we bought a house and one thing after another. And I just kind of got away from it and haven't been back down there too often since. And but I've always kept in touch. We had a really tight group of friends down there, and a couple of them were actually involved in this story. And one day, and I used to talk all the time. We were always very close. And one day he calls me up one night, and he says, Mark, I think I got a problem. And I said, well, what? And he says, there's something going on in my house. And he says, I don't know anything about this ghost. He didn't even know the word paranormal. He says, this ghost crap. He says, I think I got something in my house. And so we got to talking, and he relayed the whole story to me. Back when he first bought the house, which was in the early 90s at some point, I don't remember the exact day, he had been living out on that farm that his dad had, that I mentioned earlier, and the house got too small for his family, so he wanted to buy a house in town. And so he saw this place and fell in love with it. It is a gorgeous home. It was built in the 60s, I believe, mid-60s. And so he bought the house from these people, but these people he bought it from were very odd. That's the only way I can put it. He claimed at one point they told him, we love this house so much that when we die, we are going to come back here. And of course, like anybody would, he just laughed it off because,
right.
What are you going to say to something like that?
Yeah.
And but then strange things started happening just concerning these people. They every month or two or a couple times a year, they just show up at his front door completely unannounced and say, hey, we really miss our house. Can we take a walk through it just to,
weird.
Feel, this happened all the time. And they'd never let them know they were coming. They just show up at the door and we want to walk through our house. And, so my friend was a very nice guy. And of course, so he'd let him do it, and never, he thought it was weird, but, he didn't say anything to him. And so then eventually they did pass away in the late 90s at some point, both of them. And so then these events all took place starting around 2010, if memory serves me correctly. So that's right about the time that he called me to tell me what was going on. And it all started, he had told me a few weeks before this that he was going to start remodeling the kitchen. He says, we love this house, but this kitchen just looks so out of date. We really need to remodel the kitchen. I remember him telling me about that. Yes. So after they did that, and they had a lot of help because they had a lot of their daughters both had boyfriends and they were in construction. So they all were pitching in to help. And they got it all done. And then they decided to have a hot tub out back, and they were going to have a little get together and have a little party and to thank all the people who helped them. Mm-hmm. And they did that. And so they were all out in the hot tub. And then at one point they all decided to come in the house. But for some reason, one of the daughter's boyfriend decided to stay out for a few more minutes. So he was out there in the hot tub all by himself. And he came back in a few minutes later, and he was just completely frazzled and out of breath. And, I don't believe it. And evidently he saw an apparition. And it was a woman, and she was wearing like a white dress, period clothes like you'd see in the 1800s, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And what scared him the most about it was he said that, I can't remember exactly if there was no head at all or the face was blacked out or something where he couldn't see, but it just really freaked him out. Mm. So that was the beginning of the whole thing, and it was also the only time that there was an actual apparition that anybody saw. Okay, but after that, he would call me all the time. I mean, just we were in constant communication because he knew I was into the paranormal and that I might be able to help with it somewhat, and he had no idea how to handle anything, and he was just all a nervous wreck about the whole thing. This really rocked his world. His little dog would start, it started like that the dog would start following things on the ceiling and looking up, like he was seeing something that nobody else could see. And then he said it started with the television, and eventually it moved. It was almost as if it was using the television as its initial source of power, but eventually it went through the whole house. This static, like electrical noise kind of thing, this popping, cracking. And they had the TV people come out and there's no problem with your TV, and there was no problem with anything. And yet this was still going on. And eventually his daughter, who had a back bedroom in the house, came to him and said, "I'm not going to sleep in that back bedroom anymore. I just can't sleep in my room anymore." There's just, he never opened up to me about what exactly had scared her so bad, but evidently there were several things. And I know one of his daughters was attacked when they were alone in the house in the shower one night by whatever this was. Yes. So they were it got so bad at one point they moved to their dad's second home that they had outside of town and moved in there for about a month.
Both of the girls.
It got so bad. The whole family.
Oh, God.
He said, "I'm shutting the house down. We're leaving." And I'm like, my God, this is, I tried to keep him calm. I said, you can't let this thing get to you. You own that home. That's your house. This thing, whatever it is, does not belong there. So you need to take control. But that's not him. That was not my friend. He could not do that. I mean, he got all frazzled and let it get to him. So at one point they called in because they were a Catholic family. He called the local Catholic priest. And at first, I guess there was a lot of problems. They didn't want to send somebody out. They didn't believe in it. And then he had to go through the local diocese. And then finally somebody came out and blessed the house. And it got better for about 2 weeks. And they thought it was done. And then it came roaring back again. And it was the same thing. And another thing that they used to see was in his hallway upstairs, there was like I don't know if I'd call it a shadow person or not, although I guess that'd be the best term for it, that would walk up and down the hallway, and you could time it by your watch. It'd go one direction, and then a few seconds later, or a few, 30 seconds or a minute, it'd come back the other direction. And this would go on all night long. And the dog would bark and growl at it, and it would just go back all and night. Forth, up and down. Yeah.
Did you see
every night. Yes, I did. That I did see, but I'll get to that a little later. But this was just, I mean, he was just flipping out over this. He says, "There's something walking up and down my hall every night." And I talked to him about it. I said, "Okay, describe it to me." So he did. And he says, and it's like in a rhythm. He says it's every 30 seconds. He said, "You can set your watch to it." I'm like, huh. I said, what that sounds like to me is some kind of a sentry. Like he's guarding something, walking back and forth, how the sentries did back in the, Civil War and all that stuff. I said, that's what it sounds like to me. And I said, it doesn't interact with you, does it? And he said, no. And I says, well, then I'm sure it's residual. Yeah. And I said, but, so there was that. That was another thing that happened. And so things just kept getting worse and worse. And at one point in the middle of all this, my friend, and this you don't have to bleep out, my other friend, Alan, who grew up when I lived down there, he lived right across the street from me. He lives in Puerto Rico now with his wife. But they have business occasionally, and they have to come back to Island for, about once a year they fly in and take care of their business. And they happened to be in town at one point. And I told him, let me talk to Alan because his wife is a psychic. Maybe she can come over and tell you something about what's going on. And in the meantime, just prior to that, I did mention that the priests finally had come out from the church, and that didn't take. So I contact Alan. He says, yeah, sure. We're right there. We'll drive over and, try to help so-and-so out. So we did that. And evidently she they came over, and she walked through the house, and the first thing she said was, there is really something bad going on here. She says, this house is so dark. She says, it's just like weighing on my shoulders. And so she walked through, and she said, I'm getting the feeling that there's more than one spirit here. There's several spirits here. And then she went downstairs, and they have a beautiful finished basement downstairs. It's just, like I say, it's a gorgeous house. She went down there, and she said there was a portal down there. And she says these spirits are coming back and forth through at will. And so she said, I'm going to attempt to close the portal. So she did that. And again, things got better for a couple weeks, and then it started right back up again. And at that time, I had a friend on Facebook that was a psychic over in England. I don't remember his name anymore. And I contacted him, and I said, listen, I've got to help my friend. I said, the guy is just, he's really having a problem here, and it's driving him insane. I said, I know you're way over in England, but is there any such thing that as a long distance type thing that you could do to? And he said, well, give me his address and give me all his information. I'll see what I can do. He went into a trance or something. I don't know. And so then he came back and said the same thing that Alan's wife had said.
Oh, boy.
There's a portal in the basement. And he said these spirits are coming through willy-nilly here and there. And there's a couple of main ones, which we were assuming were the couple who he had bought the house from, but we didn't know that at that time. So he tried to do something, close the portal but from that far away, I don't know how all that stuff works. But again, it lasted a few days. This time it wasn't even a week, and it was right back to normal again. So that didn't work. So at this point, I recommended, I said, I don't know anybody in your area that does this kind of thing, but what you need to do is contact a local ghost hunter group. I said, they might be able to help you. And he said, well, can you do it for me? Because I don't know. He never has learned how to use a computer. He didn't know how to do. So I said, okay, fine. So I got on, and I'm trying to contact all these different ghost hunter groups down there. In fact, one of the ones I called was the St. Louis branch of the Ghost Hunters, because I thought, boy, this is something they might want to get involved with, And I contacted them, and they said, sir, it's interesting, but we've got so many cases. We're booked up. We just can't make the time. And I'm like, oh, man, they don't know what they're missing, because this is wild.
Yeah.
And so eventually I did find a group that I believe it was in Edwardsville, which is another city near there. And these guys called him and talked to him and set up a time, and they came out to the house. And they actually came out many times to the house. They just said it was the craziest thing they'd ever dealt with. And they did all kinds of things. That's where a lot of the EVPs, I wish I had these EVPs, because they were some of the most unbelievable things I've ever heard in my life.
Do you know where they were? Do you know where they were getting most of the EVPs? Was it in fact down in the basement area?
Actually, most of it was in that daughter's back bedroom. At one point, they had tied a string to the ceiling, and they had it come down about halfway to the floor, and they put one of them little white hollow plastic balls with the holes in it. I don't know what you call them, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, like the wiffle balls, yeah.
Right. And they tied a string on it, and this thing would get to swinging all by itself. I mean, it would just take off like one of them prop plane things, toys that kids play with, and just spin around the room like crazy. And that's where a lot of these EVPs came from, was in that back bedroom, because after that happened the first time, where the ball was swinging like crazy, I said, well, now I've got some proof really that I can tell, because his family wasn't believing him. Nobody was believing that he was having this problem with this. And so he contacted, his whole family came over, his dad, his mom, his brothers, his sisters, their girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever. Everybody came. It was all crowded in that back bedroom. And them ghost hunters were there, and the ball wouldn't move. And so at one point, and this is one of the EVPs they have, which is, it's just phenomenal. The ghost hunter says, why won't you spin the ball today like you did the last time? And the voice comes on there and says, too damn many people in here. And it's plain as day. And my friend said right away, he said, that's the guy's voice. That's the guy I bought the house from. He said he did come back, And so and it just kept going. It was just one thing after another. And in 2013, I believe, yes, I had to go down for my aunt's funeral in St. Louis because all my relation was down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go down for her funeral, and I left 2 days early. My mom had wanted all of us to go down together. I said, nope, I'm going to leave a couple days early. Since I have to go down for the funeral anyway, I'm going to go spend a few days because he's having a real problem. And I'm trying to help him the best I can from 700 miles away, but it's not working very well. I want to be down there and see what I can do. So I drove down, and we had it set up to where I was going to spend the night in that back bedroom. I said, I've got to spend the night in that back bedroom and experience whatever it is.
Yeah, you got to try it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, you're nuts. I said, yes, I am. I've been told that by many people. But I said, I am going to spend the night in that room. So I got there, and the activity was at a peak. A lot of things were going on, he said. And I could, I hate this when people get on to tell stories like this, because it always sounds hokey, but they'll say there was just a heaviness and a feeling in the house. Mm-hmm. And I always think, really, how can you, but it's true. I mean, It really is true. When I walked in there, I'd been in that house many times before all this started happening. And when I walked in there, you could feel it. I mean, there was something just like on your shoulders, just pushing you, a weight. And it was just really heavy in there. And he took me downstairs, and it was way worse down there. I mean, I couldn't wait to get the heck back up the steps. I said, man, this is not, I don't like this at all. And so we came back up and just had kind of a quiet evening. The daughter had her blanket and pillow out on the couch because she refused to sleep in there.
Wow.
She told me I was crazy too. She goes, you're not going to enjoy it. But I kept telling them all. I said, you're letting this spirit or whatever it is get the upper hand here.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if I've learned anything from watching Ghost Hunters and all these other paranormal shows I've watched over the years, is it's your house. You have to take charge of it, and you're not doing that. So I said, I'm going to prove a point to you when it comes time for me to go to bed. I'm going to announce to whatever's in there that I need to get my rest because I have a funeral to go to in a day or two, and I do not want to be disturbed.
You're
and I'm not going to tolerate any crap. Yeah. Right, and I'm not going to take any of your crap. So I'll get back to that in a minute. But then after it got dark outside, he went and shut all the lights off in the upstairs. Because I had to see this sentry we talked about earlier. I had to see this. And I had my video camera there, and by God, I put it on the lowest lux setting possible, but low light, And we're laying in actually in his bedroom on the floor so that I could get the best possible, because it's a very tight hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to get a good shot of this thing. And he said, this would be your best vantage point. So I sat there, we're laying there on the floor, and this thing starts going back and forth down the hall. And I'm like, oh man, I said, I am positive that what you're looking at here is some sort of a sentry. I said, that's what it looks like to me. I mean, it's a soldier, and he's guarding something and pacing back and forth. There was never any interaction. It was not, I'm sure it was a residual thing. But this soldier was going back and forth, up and down the hall every 30 seconds, back and forth and back and forth. And I tried my darndest to get this on film, and I thought I had it, and then I said, okay, let's turn on a light here and let me look at my camera and play it back. And you could see the whole hallway, but whatever it was would not show up on my camera. And we tried 2-3 times, and I was so disappointed.
Mark, before you go on, can you describe the shadow figure a little bit more? Could you see through it? How tall was it? Was it skinny?
It was about 6 feet tall. And it really didn't have a form or a shape. It was just this dark figure, and you couldn't see through it. It was dark as dark. And, like I say, the strangest thing about it was the way that it came back and forth every 30 seconds. I mean, you could literally set your watch to it,
And it would run the exact length of the hallway from one end to the other.
Well,
and then
it looked to me like it was going further than that. But of course, we couldn't see through the wall. There was a wall there. And so, I mean, you have to understand, we were laying on the floor in the doorway of my friend's bedroom. Right across the hall is the doorway to his daughter's bedroom that she wouldn't sleep in anymore. And then to our left was a wall. Well, actually, there was the bathroom. I'm sorry. There was a bathroom there. And this thing would walk as far as we could see, and then you wouldn't see it again. And then 30 seconds later, he would come back. So I think it was actually, as a residual haunt, it probably had a much further distance to cover than what we were seeing here. You know what I'm saying?
But it didn't.
So we weren't.
It didn't reach the end of where it was going and then disappear, or it would stop and then walk back to where it came from.
No, it would disappear because, like I say, it would reach the bathroom wall, and then that was it. You wouldn't see it for a second, and then it would come back. So it was like I told him. I said, if I was a betting man, I would say this is some sort of a sentry. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, what the hell would a sentry be? And I said, I don't know. I said, but maybe what you want to do is contact the Highland Historical Society. See if there was ever anything that was going on this land.
Did he do
that?
And
oh my God, no. I'll go more into that later. But that's just the way he was. He just, I don't really have time to be dinging around. And so anyway, then we shut all that down for the night, and it was time for bed. So I went into the bedroom, and as I said, even though I did kind of want to experience something, I've never really, except for seeing the UFO, and I had one other instance when I was a teenager delivering newspapers back up here in Minnesota, but I have not really had a ton of paranormal experiences. So there's that little bit of trepidation. You know what you're like, yeah, I do, but yet I kind of don't. But at least I had the guts to sleep in that room, which nobody in his family would do. So, and they thought I was nuts. So I went in there, and like I say, I just announced before I went to sleep to the spirit, and I did it loud enough where he could hear me in his bedroom across the hall, because I wanted him to see for himself how this works. You have to take control of the situation. Mm-hmm. So I just told him what I said before. I have a funeral I have to go to. I got this, that, the other thing. I need my sleep. Leave me the hell alone. And I went to bed, and I had no problem the whole night. Nothing. I have a habit, like most people do, of when I go to sleep, I shut my phone off and I plug it into charge overnight. The only thing that happened to me the entire time was when I woke up, I went over to my phone, and it had a lower charge than it had when I plugged it in the night before. It had drained my whatever power I had on my phone. That's the only thing that happened to me that entire night. And like I say, part of it, I was disappointed, but part of it, I proved my point. Yeah. If you take charge, they will listen to you 9 times out of 10. I really believe that. They're just passed on human beings. I mean, they're in the wrong place. They sold you the house. They don't belong there anymore.
Right.
This is your house now. So he had been nice enough, because he knew I was really into this stuff, to set it up when he heard I was coming down. The following day, he had those ghost hunters that he had been working with show up to the house, and they brought all their evidence with them. And it was great. I mean, I really was but again, I couldn't get them to give me copies of anything because they wouldn't allow it. So they said, hey, if it's not going to let us release them to you, we can't. We just can't do it. But I got to see and hear all of it, and it was absolutely amazing. The stuff that the ball swinging, and because they did catch that the first time on video. The second time, like I say, there was too damn many people in there. But the first time they did get it. And all the EVPs, I mean, this voice, and it was always the same guy. As far as I can remember, it was always the same voice. There was never, all these other people had said there was all these different spirits were coming and going, but the only one that ever came on the the EVP, the voice, was this guy that he had bought the house from. Yeah. And so it was great, and I was just thrilled. I mean, I don't like to say anything bad about anybody, but these ghost hunters he hired, I was not overly impressed with them. A lot of the evidence that they did, the video evidence, except for the ball swing, and a lot of the other stuff that they got, if Jason from Ghost Hunters had seen it, he'd have laughed him out of the house. I mean, they were pointing at different. Now you see that? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not really seeing it. I mean,
yeah,
it was just that kind of thing. They were all excited about it. Oh, that's the portal there. It's in the downstairs bathroom, and you can see it in the mirror. And they had videos of they had brought. Eventually, they got to a point where they brought a couple of gals over that they worked with to say prayers and bless that, or whatever they do, and it showed them on there, and they're walking around the basement saying their different chants and all these different things. In the bathroom, there was a bathroom in the basement, and the door was open, and you could see straight in, and there's a mirror hanging on the wall. And these guys had zoomed in with their camera so that the mirror was pretty much filling up the whole screen. And they said, now see, there, that's where the portal is. And he says, look, you can see all the spirits leaving because they want to get away from the women that are doing the chants, and they're showing it. I couldn't see it. I mean, there was something going on there, but it was not crystal clear. You couldn't really make it out. Right. And it was like, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But and I didn't tell him this, but for an actual ghost hunter who claims to be a ghost hunter to come out and say that without beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's what you're seeing here. And I didn't say anything. I was as nice as pie, but after they left, but the thing that did impress me, I will say, their personality, the way they handled themselves didn't impress me. Their video evidence didn't impress me, but by God, those EVPs impressed the hell out of me. I mean, it was some of the most phenomenal things I've ever heard in my life. And so clear, when this guy would talk, it was just crystal clear. Like he was right there, and well, obviously he was, but
did he, did they ever capture the woman speaking, the wife?
As far as I know, I don't think so. I don't remember. But boy, they sure got him. I mean, and more than once. I don't remember the other things he said. That one sticks out in my mind where he talked about too damn many people in here.
Had you ever met him and her in person when they happened to stop by? Or
nope.
Okay.
Nope, never did. I was never there. Like I say, he didn't buy the house until the late 90s, and I had stopped going down there on a regular. And from 85 to 95, I was down there 3-4 times a year. I was in this man's wedding. My friend, we were like brothers, and we wanted to keep in touch. And I had good cars at that time that I could zip down and back and spend a weekend and come back. And I was down there all the time. But around 95, things changed, and I couldn't do it as often. So I was down there again in when was it? I was down there in 03 because I had to go down, and I bought a car off my uncle in St. Louis, so I had stopped in to see him then, and there wasn't any nothing going on at that time. Everything was fine. I was back again. What was it? 2009, I believe. I had taken a trip to Mississippi, and I swung in on the way home to spend the 4th of July with them, and that was right before any of this happened. And then this time in 2013, when my aunt died, that was the only other time that I had been there. So to kind of put the bow on the box, so to speak, on the present, the big thing, the thing that really got to me the most out of all of it, like I say, those EVPs were with that voice on them were very, very cool, and I really enjoyed that. But the big one came about 2 weeks later after I was already back up here in Minnesota. He calls me up one night, and he says, "Boy, have I got something for you." And I'm like, "What?" And he says, "The ghost hunters came back, and they decided that I didn't tell you. I left out a hugely important detail here. I'm very sorry. Back when this was going on full throttle, before he had gotten the ghost hunters over there or any of that kind of stuff, it was very, very strange. I don't even know. It's going to sound like that I'm crazy, but this is actually the way it really did happen. The activity was not only in his house. Obviously, I talked about the hot tub incident, which was in his backyard, but also there was a group of nuns who were living in the house next door to his, which was on the side of the house where that daughter's back bedroom was, on their side. They were being affected by all this as well. And eventually it got to be too much for them, and they had to move. So their house was getting activity. 2 doors down from him going the other direction, and this is, I know, highly unbelievable, but he swears they told that this was a true story. He talked to the guy who lived in the house, and they told him, they verified that it was true. I still can't believe it. Him and his wife were in the house one night watching television, and so help me, what they said was a horse-drawn carriage went right through their living room.
Wow, that's cool.
Oh, it was.
I like that.
I can't imagine. Yeah. Oh my God. So it was not just his house. What was going on here was affecting homes on all up and down his
we've
whole
heard
side
that
of the street.
before. You know, entire swaths of land might be affected, and it may be because of a group of people doing really dark, naughty stuff, you know, in the woods with sacrificial stuff. I've heard of that, or, I mean, who knows?
Well, one thing that did uncover during all this was, he says, I've talked to some gals who were friends of this couple's daughters years ago when they first moved in, that they had 2 daughters that lived in the house with them. And evidently these daughters were messing with Ouija boards. They'd have their friends come over and they'd all do the Ouija board. Now, again, I don't have all the details about it, but that's one possible. They could have opened up something back even in those days. You know, who knows? I don't know that much about Ouija boards, but I know that you shouldn't mess with them if you don't know what you're doing. So, and teenage girls probably didn't know what they were doing. So that was one possibility. But what were we talking about now? I lost it again.
I interrupted you because I was just conjecturing about the land being all screwed up, because you were talking about the next door neighbor and then the house 2 doors down.
Right. Okay, well, that leads us to this phone call. Now, keep in mind what I said about the sentry in the hallway and the horse-drawn carriage that went through the neighbor's house, okay? So he calls in and he tells me the ghost hunters came back, and they decided it would be a good idea to walk around the backyard with their recorders running and see if they could pick up anything that way. Now, the first thing I'm thinking is, oh, you're going to have birds chirping, you're going to have guys out mowing their grass, you're going to have because it was in the daytime they did this. And I'm like, this isn't going to work. And he says, but it really did, because the final EVP that they were able to collect was the absolute coolest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It's as plain as day. And it's like taking a trip back in time. I mean, I literally started crying when I heard it. It was that unbelievable. You can make it out as plain as day, troops marching. You can hear all their feet in unison. You can hear the horses, the tinkle of the horse hoofs and the tinkle of the reins and all this. And like a whole troop is going right through his backyard. And I mean, this is it's the absolute coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. So that got me going on my quest. At that point, I said, there is something really strange going on here besides the fact that you've got a portal in your basement. I said, you've got all this residual stuff going on. I mean, obviously, the neighbor 2 doors down that had the horse-drawn carriage come through, that was residual. Your sentry in your hallway is residual. And now you've got an EVP of a troop of soldiers marching through your backyard. Again, more than likely a residual. So I said, it's almost like something in time wants everybody to know that they're here or that they existed at one time or something. So I started doing research. The first thing any of us thought of was the Civil War, you know, because that's the biggest thing that would come to mind about troops and, you know, all this kind of thing. So I started digging on the Civil War, and I could not come up with anything. And like I say, my friend was not any help in this regard at all. And I had contacted the Highland Historical Society at one point. I says, listen, I told them the problem, and I says, and we're trying to figure out if there was ever any troop movements through this area during the Civil War. And they said, there was nothing in this area during the Civil War. Nothing came anywhere near here during the Civil War. And I was just getting more and more frustrated all the time. I said, there has to be a connection with the military, because all these things, the sentry, the horse-drawn carriage, all the EVP, it's all pointing in one direction, military. And I said, there has to be something. So I kept digging, couldn't find a damn thing. So finally, out of frustration, I got on my Facebook page, oddly enough. I had a different page at that time, and different friends. And I posted, I said, listen, and I told them what was going on. I said, does anybody have any ideas? I says, I need to find out what this is. And I'm at the I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know where to turn. And all of a sudden, this gal come on, a friend of mine from Milwaukee at the time, and she says, well, have you given any consideration to the War of 1812? And I said, no, I don't know anything about the War of 1812. You know, I mean, I just went right to the Civil War. And she said, look into it. So I did some digging. It turns out there was a fort in, I believe, Breeze. There was a fort in Greenville. And there was a fort in St. Jacob. And Highland is right in the middle of all this.
Oh, boy.
Okay? So it stands to reason that whenever they would have troop movements going through the area, they'd go the shortest route between 2 points is a straight line. They'd go right through Highland. So there's your tie-in. All this stuff has to do somehow, and I think when that portal got opened up, however that happened, it somehow sucked in all this 1812 stuff. And so now all that stuff is showing up.
I gotta say, it's so cool that you did that, because how many times have you heard me ask, and it's no knock on anybody, it's not always easy to find this stuff out, but you have found the direct tie-in, you know, to an EVP and to some of the things going on in the home. You're like, well, that seems highly likely that the War of 1812 would tie in with hearing horse hooves and troops marching through. That's so cool that you found that out.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it took a lot of work, but a lot of different websites I went to and digging, and I was able to uncover all kinds of stuff.
Big high five on that.
Yeah, well, history of this town that the whole time I was living there, nobody ever talked about. I mean, because the town was founded in, I believe, 1865 or something. So this would have all been before that. But you'd think that something as historic as a major war would be something that the Historical Society would be on, you know, that this was going on this, because I'm sure there were settlers in Highland at that time. It wasn't a city, but there had to be people living there, and all this stuff was going on. I remember my friend whose wife had gone through my friend's house. I remember you remember me telling you about that earlier. When we were kids, there was my house. His was right across the street, and there were two more homes. A street and the railroad tracks were right there, very close to our homes. And when we didn't have anything else to do, we'd walk along them it was probably dangerous as hell for young boys to be doing this, but we'd walk along them railroad tracks, and we found arrowheads all over the place. Beautiful arrowheads. I mean, the tips were always broke off, but they were wonderful, you know, and two young boys finding arrowheads. I mean, this is, you know, and I remember asking him about it. I said, where do you think? And he found one that had the tip on it yet and everything. I mean, it was extremely cool. And I remember, I remember asking him, I said, where do you think these are, when did this happen? You know, where did these come from? Because they were, you know, not all over, but you could always usually find one, you know what I mean, every time you'd walk up and down. And I had about 3 or 4, and he had 3 or 4 over the years. And he said, well, you know, Cahokia is just down the freeway, and that's where the Cahokia Mounds are, and that's where that great big Indian civilization used to be. I don't know if you've ever seen or heard about that, but I highly recommend going down there. They got the Monk's Mound, which is the biggest. It's the same size as one of the pyramids over in Egypt. It's just this massive mound. It's very cool. But so at that time, I thought he was right, that that's where it came from. Well, when I was doing all this research about the War of 1812, I found out, because like I say, I didn't know anything about the War of 1812, but evidently the Indians were on the side of the French, Canadians, and fighting against the United States, because they were promised by the Canadians that if they fought for them, if the Canadians won, they'd give them their land back. So the Indians were fighting alongside the Canadians. And that railroad track that I just was referring to that goes right through town was there then. And it was used as a way to, between the forts to ship supplies back and forth. It was the supply train would go on that track. And that supply train used to be regularly attacked by Indians. So that's where all the arrowheads came from.
Wow.
So it's like all this stuff is starting to come together, you know, and it's like nobody in that town talks about this stuff. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is a major part of history that should be known and talked about now that I've found it all out. And it's like, nobody ever talks about it.
So what did your friend say when you told him all of this information?
Oh, he was flabbergasted. He's like, well, there you go. He said, that explains the sentry in our hallway and the thing that went through our neighbor's front room 2 doors down, and that EVP of the marching. And I wish I had these to play for you here, because they are just the most phenomenal EVPs would ever hear. But I know my friend has them on a disc. I know that the ghost hunters he was working with have them on discs, but I can't get it. He would never give them to me. His logic was, he was afraid that if he was to put it on a disc and send it up here, that some of those spirits might piggyback on it and come up here with it and be in my house. And he said, I don't want that happening. Well, I told him, I said, first of all, the odds of something like that happening are 1,000,000 to 1 against it. And secondly, I'm willing to take that chance. They're so cool that I would like to have a copy, but he just wouldn't let them go. But they are there. I mean, somebody's got them, and like I say, his dad, his whole family can verify all this. I doubt that he'll talk to anybody, but his whole family would verify it. My friend Alan, whose wife went through the house, she had a small part in all this. They'd verify it. This is not a made up thing. This really happened. And then after about the 4th year, it just stopped, and it all went away, and he hasn't had any problems since. And for his sake, I hope he doesn't, because this just rattled his world, something awful. So,
and he's still in the house now.
Mm-hmm.
And
no
activity.
Wife lives there. The last I heard 4 years ago, no activity. Like I say, for
of course, you guys haven't been talking, right? He's
upset with me for something. I believe it had to do with his band at the time. I made a statement that got back to him, I think. But anyway, that's water under the bridge.
Kind of a funny question, but and of course it's hard to know because you haven't been speaking to him. But do you know how long some of those problems lasted as far as the War of 1812? I mean, were there things going on for around 4 years and then they stopped? I mean, is that the cycle maybe that this thing is running out there,
I don't know. I mean, like I say, it started around 2010 and it ended around 2014, and it hasn't been, and that's everything. That's the guy he bought the house from, the 1812 stuff. It's all just gone. I mean, and will it come back? I don't know. But
I mean,
it's hard to say. He
could be having problems now. He might have had activity for the last couple of years, and of course, you wouldn't be privy to it, though.
Well, I'm still very, very close to his brother.
Okay.
And we're big St. Louis Blues hockey fans, and we've been waiting 54 years for our team to win the Stanley Cup, which they just did.
Yeah.
A month or two ago. And so I was on the phone with several times during that whole Stanley Cup thing. But I was in touch with his brother several times during the 7-game Stanley Cup final series. And he did not. I'm sure that if something was kicking up again at his brother's house, he would have mentioned.
He would have. He would have said something.
So,
I mean, there's just very few times that I get to talk to somebody that actually got to, at least as close as we can guess, pinpoint a reason behind some of these, what, lack of a better term, a haunting, that includes shadow people and EVPs and, the auditory experiences with the horse-drawn carriage is so cool. And then, what a shame to not be able to, because I know the listeners are going, they keep mentioning the EVPs and we're dying to hear them, but unfortunately for now, at least, unless I can get a hold of your friend.
It needs to be heard, this stuff. So, and this story needed to be told, because it was just the most far out thing. I mean, I have heard Amityville Horror, seen that movie, all these different things that different people have talked about over the years. But this whole thing, once we got that last EVP, and I did that research and found out what war we were actually dealing with here, I think this is one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
Well, that's a hell of a verification.
Yep, and that tie-in with, that's another thing I've never heard of before, of is somebody announcing to the buyer of a home that when I die, I'm coming back,
No.
and then actually fulfilling that promise and showing up. I mean, that's
the balls of these people. They can't just let the guy have his home with his family. And how odd is that? Who comes back and says, "Hey, here we are again. We just want to take a walk through our home"? I mean, what in the hell? These people are so funny.
It happened a lot.
That's so abnormal.
A lot according to him.
That is so
abnormal.
abnormal.
I mean, they were a little different,
How long would they stay?
Evidently.
How long would they stay, Mark, when they'd come over?
About a half hour or so. I don't think it was any big deal. But, I mean, what if they were in the middle of something, and who knows? But...
did they go in the basement and do some weird rituals, and they're like, we'll be back, but what they meant was, we'll really be back, you can't get rid of us.
As far as I know, they didn't do any rituals or anything. They were just an elderly couple who loved their house, and I believe that the circumstances that led up to the sale were financial. They did not want to move.
Yeah.
They loved that house, and it's a beautiful home. It really is. It's a beautiful home.
No wonder that really tore them up then to have to get rid of the house. If they didn't want to actually sell it. And then to come back, though.
Yeah.
Hey, we're here. Just want to walk through. Don't mind us. Go about your business.
It's a crazy story.
Also, besides remodeling the kitchen, was there any other major remodeling done of the home or the property?
Well, it's funny because one of the last times I talked to him before we lost contact, he told me that they had a great big tree that was right in the backyard, right next to the house.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, we came home one day and he said that our whole basement was flooded. He said that the roots from the tree had punctured a pipe or some damn thing, and it had flooded the entire basement. He says, we have to remodel the whole damn thing. And right away I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go again.
Oh boy. Was that after they had remodeled the kitchen?
Oh yeah, yeah. Because the kitchen remodel is what started the whole thing.
Yeah, that's something that we've heard before, right? You start to tear a building apart, and we've seen that on TV shows too. Even when it's not a home, but even if it's some kind of an old asylum or a hospital or something, they start ripping into a wall or something, and then it's like they open up the portal to wherever, and then whatever's on the other side is pissed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't like that.
No, they're like, don't screw with my house.
In fact, on one of the EVPs, if my memory serves me right, that you just reminded me, the voice talks about that. You messed with our kitchen. It says, in fact, I'm almost positive. Yeah, that is another one of them. Yep.
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
Oh, I'm telling you, these are the most amazing EVPs you'll ever hear. I mean,
I doubt I'll get to hear them, unfortunately, but we could try.
Well, you never know.
You
never know. Somebody might be able to get through to him. He used to say all the time when this was all going on, because I've done some writing in my life and won some awards. Nothing major, but and a lot of newspaper work and stuff like that.
Hey, that's cool. And, that's very cool.
And he used to tell me, he said, somebody should write a book about this. He says, this is the craziest thing.
That sure would be cool to maybe say I do write him and he would be open to talking about it, But I see his point, because another thing that runs the vein of this is, and I've even asked someone that has current activity, I always say, well, it's been quiet. Are you afraid that talking to me will get things stirred up again? And some people are like, yeah, a little bit,
Yeah, I know that's a factor in it too.
Yeah,
he don't want it coming back. Whatever.
No, not when he still lives in the damn place. I can't blame him for that. If I had a shadow person, just the one sighting was enough for me. And if I had one in my hallway every single night, the residual thing would be more of a comfort. Obviously, if it's looking at you or standing over your bed, screw that. I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But I mean, that would. Still, every night, you said you can set a timer to it every 30 seconds. Holy cow. I mean, that is incredible.
And this I saw with my own two eyes, so that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I could have caught it on film. I tried desperately to record it.
That's all that matters is you tried. Because everyone's going to go, why didn't you record it? This way you can go, I tried, damn it. No,
I got some nice pictures of his wall, but
yeah,
that was it.
Yeah. You tried. You did what you could. Well, Mark, I cannot thank you enough for coming on to share this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It was my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, I'm so-and-so. I was given this name by my parents. I've been to such and such a college. I've done these things in my profession. I produce a little biography. Buddha says, forget it. That's not true. That's some story. That's all gone. That's all past. I want to see the real you are now. Well, nobody knows who that is. Because we don't know ourselves except through listening to our echoes and consulting our memories. But then there's a real you, and that again leads us back to this question. Who are you? That is the real you. We shall see how they play with this exam by the koans to get you to come out of your shell and find out who you really are. First there is summer, and then there is spring. when you settle down in the train to read your newspaper and so on, you are not the same person who a little while ago left the platform. If you think you are linking your moments up in a chain. And this is what binds you to the wheel of birth and death. But when you know that every moment in which you are is the only moment, this comes into Zen. A master will say to somebody, get up and walk across the room. And he comes back and he says, where are your footprints? They've gone. So where are you? Who are you? When we are asked who we are, we usually give a kind of recitation of a history.